websites like Temu and Shein and AliExpress have a lot of questionable practices, but they're making a lot of money. So Shein alone generates billions annually. So an estimate of 66 billion in sales in 2023.
66 billion.
billion.
Yeah.
Welcome to Checks and Balances, the Takeover. This is Jess and Makayla back with another episode. And what are we talking about today?
We're talking about dupe culture, which when we were talking about this topic, I was like, what are you talking about?
What is a dupe?
This is something that I've learned. So there's a difference between counterfeit and dupes. And we're talking about the dupe. So counterfeit is when, correct me if I'm wrong, the person selling the item in question is trying to replicate exactly like for like the item. So like a fake Gucci bag. The dupe culture is more like it's actually above board thing.
Yes.
Okay.
I feel like I would simply describe it as a counterfeit item is when they're replicating everything down to the branding, whereas a dupe is when they're replicating maybe the formula and the materials and the look of something, but not necessarily trying to pretend they are that original product.
Got it. Okay. So there's definitely been a shift in the last little while of dupes being more acceptable.
It's not really a new thing. I think people have been trying to find cheaper versions of things for years, but lately it's definitely become a bit more normalized, I think, especially on social media with like the Gen Zs, that kind of thing. People are kind of celebrating the fact that there are cheaper versions of things that would otherwise be unattainable.
Yeah, there's definitely this conscious shift, I think, from what is desirable and what's nice to have, but balancing that with what's practical to have. And I think that's the angle as a financial advisor. You come at it like, what's good for the budget? And certainly, I've not used a dupe until this year. When we've bought our house, we've got a mortgage, and I am absolutely I love Charlotte Tilbury's Magic Cream. I've used that for years and years, and this is the first year that I've tried a dupe. So yeah, there we go. So it's obviously creeping in even to my sphere of what I'm doing.
And I think like we will also talk in this episode about kind of the bad side of dupes, because obviously, some small businesses and things like that might be putting out a product and then something like Temu rips it off. But I think for the most part, being able to find something that's within your budget but still gets you the same or a very similar result is a really great tool to have in your kit these days, especially because everything is so expensive.
Yeah, cost of living crisis, etc. going on. It's sort of actually probably celebrated, I would say, on social media more so than it has before. It's not just I think previously it would have been kind of a little bit embarrassing to say that you'd used a dupe. But maybe embarrassing is a strong word, but you wouldn't necessarily parade around that that's what you're doing. Whereas now it's highlighted and celebrated that, hey, look at this affordable version of this thing that we can all jump in on.
How lucrative is the dupe industry? So like we've just said, this is a thing that's really taken off. It's happening more and more. And companies that make dupes they're killing it. So I think our first example is, I don't know if you say it Shein or Shein.
I've heard both, Shein and Shein.
Okay.
It's a real, let's say, what are we picking?
I'm going to go with Shein.
Okay, cool.
And personally, I have very mixed feelings about Shein because listen, I'm not really a dupe person. I go straight to the source every time.
She does.
And I do think that websites like Temu and Shein and AliExpress have a lot of questionable practices, but they're making a lot of money. So Shein alone generates billions annually. So an estimate of 66 billion in sales in 2023.
66 billion. Yeah.
So obviously, well, yeah, like I know tons of people that do their shopping on Shein for clothes, home goods, all kinds of things, because it is so dirt cheap. And I think because it's so cheap, it's a little bit easy to turn a blind eye to maybe the little bit of the unethical side of it. So
or take a hit on the quality as well.
Exactly.
But it's not just companies like Shein, right? We're also looking at, this is one that I've learned from around the office, MCO Beauty. So they're on track to, I've never heard of it. They're on track to record Australian, 250 million in sales this year. Another one, which I had never really thought of as a dupe, to be honest, was The Ordinary
Yeah, I don't know
skincare.
if I'd consider The Ordinary a dupe per se, but if you haven't heard of The Ordinary, they basically take specific ingredients that are generally in skincare products and they sell you those ingredients individually or in like separate, I don't, doses isn't the right word, but it's a
Little
lot cheaper for you
bottles.
to go out and go, okay, I'm going to buy niacinamide drops rather than I'm going to go buy this like $100 niacinamide face cream.
Okay, right. And so the shift towards companies even like that, which are not necessarily dupes, but kind of trying to come through with the cheaper versions of that
Yeah.
really premium stuff. Estee Lauder, so originally The Ordinary was started up and it was funded by private investments and things like that. Estee Lauder, which is a very well-known brand, in 2017 invested $1 billion in The Ordinary.
Into The Ordinary.
Yes.
Wow.
So they had a 29% stake, later increased that stake in June 2021 to 76%. And now The Ordinary valuation is $2.2 billion.
So you can really see that like even these big name brand companies see how lucrative the dupe or the more accessible version of something is.
Yeah, absolutely. They're shifting their focus towards that and making money from it either way, I guess.
So another one we had on here that our lovely producer researcher Emily put together was a company called Quince.
Which neither of us had heard of.
No, I've never heard of it before.
It is so what it does is it brings luxury products like Mongolian cashmere and Italian leather to everyone at radically low prices, which is like, how do we know this is legit?
It does sound a little bit dodgy, but obviously they're not that dodgy because they generated $300 million in revenue.
So they're doing okay.
Yeah, and they're aiming to double that in the next year. And, I found it interesting because when I went to go look at this, the first thing I noticed on their landing page is literally a dupe of a luxury brand called Totem that makes this like very specific scarf jacket. And that is what's on.
Jacket.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into it, but that's what's on their landing page. So that already right there, that's a dupe. And then the other thing it seems like they're known for is dupes of like the Skims basics.
Kim Kardashian's brand. Yeah, interesting. I might have to check that out myself,
Very interesting. But they're obviously making heaps of money, so it's working out for them.
Yeah, totally.
Before we move on, we talk all the time about planning and growing our wealth, but protecting that wealth is just as important. That's why having the right insurance in place can help when life goes unexpectedly.
And that's why this episode is brought to you by Partners Life, a New Zealand operated award-winning insurance provider with over 300,000 Kiwis insured and 89% of claims paid.
Partners Life understand that having some insurance is better than having no insurance. They have flexible and personalized solutions for any budget or situation.
Check out their website in our show notes below.
Thinking about challenger brands, people like Lululemon who make expensive, nice quality leggings.
Shout out Canada.
Oh, are they Canadian?
They're Canadian, yes.
I didn't know. Nice. So they have actually, to disrupt this whole dupe culture thing, have encouraged people to swap out their dupes for their leggings. They had a try-on event in LA where they were basically like, bring in your dupe ones and we'll give you some actual Lululemons.
I really wish I lived in LA for that because that would be so legit. But it's a good point because companies have been trying to replicate Lululemon's quality for years. Like I've always been hearing about, try this Amazon brand or try this new fitness brand. And
it's never the
personally,
same.
I've never found anything quite as good. And a side note is you also can't match Lululemon's like return policy.
Oh, what is it?
You can basically rough up as many leggings, clothes, whatever as you want, and you can return them without any fuss.
It's like a lifetime subscription of leggings.
Guarantee.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Well, yeah, so obviously they're giving away these free leggings at some event, but I think the purpose of that for them was to actually highlight that, there's all these people out there trying to copy us, not as good as us actually at the end of the day, and the amount of impressions they would have had, like this would have created so much buzz around the Lululemon brand that it made a lot of sense for them to do.
And I feel like that obviously worked because there was a period of time where Lululemon was kind of faltering a bit in terms of popularity, but I think they've shot up quite a bit again. Like they're earning a lot more revenue and people are talking about them again. So they've come out of that hole a little bit. And I wonder if that had something to do with it.
They're trying to take on these dupes one at a time. The other really interesting case of this was Olaplex. And I'm a big fan of being blonde. I do rely on Olaplex a lot to hold my hair together. And they actually duped themselves as a challenge to this.
Okay, this sounds wild. Tell me about it.
Which is weird. So they released a product called Ola Dupe. And so it was designed to look and feel exactly like their No. 3 hair perfector. If anyone has that, you'll know how great it is. They sent out 700 bottles of these to influencers. They generated tons of buzz around that product, this dupe product. Turns out it was actually them the whole time. And I think they indirectly see that as creating hype about Olaplex's product as well. And either way, they were making money.
I guess it's kind of like a show, like almost we can't be duped, because even when you thought it was a dupe, it's actually just as, like, you know, like we're the original and we're the best.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Totally.
Okay, so we have to talk about the biggest dupe, I think, in Australasia at the minute, which is something called MCO Beauty.
Yes, and they're ripping off a brand that I love. Like I said, Charlotte Tilbury Magic Cream has been my go-to for a really long time, but it is very expensive. I think it's now $170 for a little 50 ml thing, which I know.
Ooh,
I know.
Even that hurts me.
I know. Do you know the problem is that I got given it as a gift once when I left an employer way back, and then they gave me, like, that was my parting gift, and I've not been able to go without it now, which sounds really ridiculous, but I absolutely love it. And like I said, this is the first year I've tried a dupe, but I think MCO Beauty have really focused on trying to rip off Charlotte Tilbury's products.
Yeah, so I think, so with MCO Beauty, if you've not heard of it before, they're a cosmetics brand, but I would say they'd be considered like drugstore cosmetics. So they're stocked in like Chemist Warehouse, Woolworths, places like that. And they started on the Charlotte Tilbury angle. So they were duping things like their foundation, their setting powder, like you said, the face cream, but they've kind of branched into a lot of other dupes now as well. So I see that they have been doing, if you've ever heard of like the Brazilian Bum Bum spray, they do that now in almost every scent that's available with the real brand. It's now available through MCO Beauty as well. And personally, I've never used any of them, but I've heard that it's just as good. So obviously they're doing it right.
And people are loving it because they're on track to record $250 million in Australian dollars in sales this year. So they're popping off.
And they're also taking all the right steps. So, like, I know you used the word ripping off earlier.
I know.
Which is like rogue. But they are taking all of the right steps to make sure that they're not actually ripping off. So they they've taken into consideration all the legal aspects of it. So they have a team apparently that checks to make sure that they're not actually breaking any copyright laws.
So they are ripping it off, but they're just doing it in an above board
in the
way.
Low-key way.
Yeah, in an above board way that's legally fine.
Board.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I don't think I've seen a brand go to this extent of duplicating stuff until MCO Beauty. So it's massive.
Totally.
Okay, so of course we have to talk a little bit about the kind of ethics sides of things and the bad side of duping, I would say. And when we were talking about planning this episode and we were talking about dupe culture, I had this very specific example come to mind, and maybe some people listening to this will also know about this, but in 2020 there was this dress that went viral, and like it was just like a pink dress with strawberries on it. And when I say it went viral, it was on, TikTok and Instagram. And it was a small business, like a woman designed this dress, but it was very expensive because all of her hard work and time went into like sewing and producing and creating this design. But because it blew up so hugely, all of these other retailers like Shein and those kinds of companies were like, oh, great, we can make a buck on replicating this easy. And so they started producing it in cheaper materials and obviously in factories and selling dupes of the dress she designed, which was kind of like at her detriment because she was no longer able to make sales on her dress, which she designed.
Yeah. I think, like, how expensive was her dress? Do we know?
It was about $400 US.
Oh, yeah. So I was going to say, like, because this happens in fashion all the time, right? Like, you've got the designer brands who come out with their stuff, which is thousands of dollars. Then you've got the trickle down effect to all the other retailers who start to replicate and make it more accessible to everyone else. And you could argue that the people buying the Shein dress she's not missing out on dollars from them, because there's no way they would have spent the
True.
$400 on the dress.
That is a
However,
good point.
I do agree there are ethical concerns of ripping off people's intellectual property. It stifles creativity. There's a question of, it's annoying if people, even when you're a kid and someone copies you, you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
And
That was mine.
yeah, exactly. It's even like, imagine if, we have this podcast that we do. Imagine if someone else was doing a podcast and every other week they had the same topic the week after we'd just done it. That would be annoying. It would be irritating. So I totally get it, and it's frustrating. And I think that's definitely something to think about when you're about to purchase a dupe. Like, who is this actually impacting? And would I have spent the money on the expensive thing? Is this bad for the creativity and the original creator who came up with this concept and this formula and things like that? So something to think about. And the other part is that those cheaper rip-off versions are quite often not thinking about sustainability.
Mhm.
So when we were doing the prep for this episode, I went and looked up my little dupe, magic cream dupe, and because Charlotte Tilbury I know is cruelty-free, and I thought, maybe this dupe isn't cruelty-free, and that's where some of the cost comes in, and that's where they're cost saving. And no, the dupe's also cruelty-free and vegan, so
Can't go wrong then.
they're ticking some boxes. But there's definitely a question of are those more expensive versions prioritizing sustainability and things like that over the low cost? So bearing all this stuff in mind, on balance, obviously a dupe is extremely good for the budget. So if you're tight on things at the moment, needing to cut back in some areas like I did, then dupes could be a solution to that for sure. And I think, just taking everything into consideration when you do that.
Yeah, I do. I don't think that dupes are a bad thing. I think saving money is really key, and especially when it's something that's a non-essential item, but you really want it. If you can find a way to make that want cheaper, do it.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we'll wrap up there for today. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to Partners Life for sponsoring this episode. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.